Honda, as we know it, made some pretty sweet cars over the decade. We got the Honda NSX, S2000, Civic, and Integra. Even some of these cars are front wheel drive, which nipped on the heels of some more expensive rear and four wheel drive rivals. And you guys know that rear wheel drive and four wheel drive reign supreme in the whole car enthusiast hierarchy. In today's video, we're going to mainly talking about Honda's front wheel drive cars and how they sort of changed the perception as front wheel drive as we know it today. Front wheel drive isn't anything revolutionary or groundbreaking, but when it comes to cost and packaging, it reigns supreme amongst pretty much every economy or econobox there is out there. Typically, engines in front wheel drive cars are placed transversely, mostly to optimize for the most cabin space and weight distribution, which is heavily, and I mean heavily, linked to how the car feels, pretty much its handling dynamics. And this pretty much is all the same all across the board. This goes for basic cars like the Hyundai Venue and all the way to something, crazier like the Civic Type R. Now, typically we're gonna go down, I guess we can do a little history thing here. So throughout history, I know that most rear-wheel drive vehicles were, those are the typical vehicles because they were pretty cheap, gas was pretty cheap, and the cars were they were pretty damn heavy, I must say. And I'm looking at you, muscle cars. This drivetrain layout was pretty much mainstream. Like even Toyota, which is Honda's arch nemesis, had mostly rear-wheel drive vehicles at this time, and front-wheel drive wasn't as common, and it wasn't pretty much a thing. But there's one car that sort of made it popular. We have to go all the way back to 1959 when the original Mini came out. And this pretty much popularized the front wheel drive layout and a rather small hatchback body style. Honda also did have its own go with the N6 and I'm butchering this up. The N360 in this super mini category. But in this regard, we can kind of say that Mini was a pretty influential car, and I would think they're a pioneer in this space. Now, when we're talking about Hondas, we gotta take a look at the Civic. Now, when the first gen came out in, I believe it's 1972, it was a pretty fuel efficient car, and during this time, the Western world was going through an energy crisis, and the majority of cars on the road at that time were pretty damn inefficient, and it just cost way too much to run, too much cost for gas, and kind of reminds me of a certain time that happened recently. And basically, these large body cars with V8 just simply wasn't going to cut it anymore. Now, the thought of making, front wheel drive even sporty, that was pretty much an unusual idea. And it wasn't even anything remotely synonymous with sport at all. Typically, if you want anything sporty, it was mostly rear wheel drive because it offered better traction throughout corners. And who can forget about donuts, burnouts, just, sliding over the place? Like, that's the signature of rear wheel drive. Now, I'm going to bring up a Civic that you guys have actually never heard of before. You guys might have heard of it if you're a total, Civic nerd. I'm also kind of surprised that a lot of people haven't mentioned this car when they were talking about hot hatches. I guess that whole spotlight was stolen by the GTI, the Mark 1 GTI. But in 1974, Honda would release the Civic RS. And yes, I'm talking about that RS. Basically, that sixth generation Civic sedan that got the EK9 Type R treatment, with the frosted headlights and stuff like that. Not frosted, I've read the color. They're like, you guys know what I mean. And it had a rather odd CVT transmission and unique gauge cluster. Okay, I'm kind of getting carried away there. But the RS model, or road sailing, was equipped with a 1.1 liter four cylinder. It only made about 75 horsepower, which was a good horsepower bump from the standard Civic, which had about 52 horsepower. The RS gave you dual carburetors, a freer flowing intake manifold, more aggressive cams, high compression pistons, and an exhaust header that was kind of unique to this particular model compared to other Civics. Now, put down in the comments if you guys think the Civic RS deserves a spot with the table with the GTA, or is the Civic RS just simply too slow? So since I brought up the Mark 1, we're gonna kind of talk about that a little bit. The Mark 1, I knew for a fact, came with a force. It pretty much made this little Civic RS. While I'm pretty sure it handled good, you can feel everything. It's just pure analog. The GTI just blew this thing out of the water. It came with a 1.5 liter four-cylinder that put out a pretty impressive 108 horsepower, and it can do 0 to 100 in 9.2 seconds, which was pretty damn good for its time. And the top speed was about 180 kilometers. It came with standard independent McPherson struts in the front, with lower wishbones, and a torsion beam axle in the back. Now, this car would pretty much become the benchmark for pretty much what you would call hot hatchbacks. Personally, I'll be honest with you guys, I'm not really a fan of the Mark 1s. I'm more of a fan of like the Mark 2 onwards. That's just me. But I give respect where it's due. Now, the second Gen Civic really wasn't anything to write home about. It was pretty much the same thing. It didn't really, offer anything groundbreaking over the previous version. Obviously, a new body style and all that. But it was kind of forgotten. Probably that's why the GTI stole the spotlight. Now, moving on to the third generation Civic. This one would finally match its rival, the main rival being the GTI. And yes, it actually did for once. None of this, 205 horsepower versus like 240 horsepower kind of thing. This was actually the very first Civic to wear the SI badge, and this was in 1984. And unfortunately, guys, this car was only available in Japan. Now, there's not that much differentiation, but there are some little features that differentiate the SI from the standard model Civic. One noticeable feature is it had a distinctive bulge in the hood, and also, even more crazier, it was the only double overhead cam D-series engine, dubbed the D16A, yes, but also you guys may call this engine, or Honda fanboys call it the ZC engine. It was basically a 1.6 liter four-cylinder that made about 118 horsepower. Nothing too crazy, pretty slow nowadays. It further increased the GTI's top speed to almost 200 kilometers an hour, which is, again, pretty impressive, and it blew the GTI out of the water because this generation kind of came out at the same time, and it was really shaping up to be a pretty hot hatch, and the Japanese kind of showed, or Honda basically showed what they could do with this platform. But unfortunately for us here in the Western world, we pretty much got shafted. We got a 1.5 liter, and it made about 93 horsepower, but the handling and the sportiness was still there, and it still was a pretty big hit, I find. Now, the fourth Gen Civic was a powerful and unique force. This, I think, is a very pivotal moment. Now, this generation, I'm only going to be talking about the SI and the SI Era model. So pretty much, if you guys don't know what the SI model is, it was equipped with the legendary B16A engine. And for the first time ever, we finally got a fiery hot hatch that blew the competition. This capitalized on Volkswagen's iconic GTI. But for us here in the US and Canada, we got the SI model, which was a D16A1 engine, which made around, I think I might messed up those engines. Let's just say D16 for short. It made about 108 horsepower. But the Japanese EF9 model was the game changer. This is the model that kind of changed the way how front-wheel drive was, basically. It had a unique bumper fascia, but more importantly, it was equipped with the legendary B16A, which made about 100. It was a 1.6 liter that made about 160 horsepower. This Civic had double wishbone suspension, and believe it or not, guys, it had you could actually get this optioned with a helical limited slip differential, which is crazy. Not only did it outperform the Mark II GTI in acceleration, it outhandled it by a far margin too. This Civic right here changed the standards for hot hatches, but also the dynamics and the road feel you get from it. The only car, in my personal opinion, that came close to this was the Peugeot 205 GTI. It was definitely underpowered, but its cornering abilities were comparable to the Japanese EF9. At this very moment in time, Honda could actually provide you with a sporty experience at a very attractive price point. and you could no longer scoff at front wheel drive. This thing outhandled, and this platform was shared. The CRX also used this engine, and also obviously the Civic and Integra use this engine. And the Civic and CRX, and also the Integra, they made their mark on the world in the whole world of sport compact cars. The Integra now, this would be the second generation Integra. This would be the first car to receive the VTEC treatment. Finally, a true VTEC engine was actually available to us North Americans on this side of the world, and this came in the form of the Acura Integra GSR, and it had a rather unique engine, but it wasn't all that unique. It was just 1.7 liters instead of 1.6, and it was dubbed as the B17A. Now, moving along with the third release of the third release, or the third gen Integra, everyone likes to talk about these as sort of being like the golden era of JDM cars. They carried the same spirit as the previous generation did, and they pretty much expanded on that. And finally, on this side of the world, we received the B16A, not in Civic form, but in the CRX Del Sol, which to me was a rather interesting choice. This same B16A that came in the Del Sol will actually appear in the next generation Civic, and I'll talk about that one a little bit later. Now, this Integra was instantly a hit amongst everyone, including car enthusiasts, no matter the trim level. It offered a pretty good chassis and suspension compared to the competition. Now, you thought Honda would pretty much, flatline, stagnate here. They kind of just would get comfortable and sort of release the same thing over and over again. But no, they took it up a notch. In 1995, Honda released the Integra Type R. This model set the benchmark again for front-wheel drive cars. Not only did it compete with cars more expensive and powerful, it held its own ground, and even in some acceleration tests, it could be seen dangerously close to S2000, which, with a very disadvantaged powertrain layout front-wheel drive, it was keeping up with Porsche Boxers, and that says a whole lot. The Integra Type R came with the legendary B18 steam engine, a helical slip differential, spot welding on the chassis, I can't even speak today. What is wrong with me? They had spot welding on the chassis, just like how Porsche does it, and significant changes to the car's handling dynamics. No other front-wheel drive car even came close to this feeling of emotion and connection. And even to some current day front-wheel drive cars, they just can't match this feeling. The US and Canada, we both received this trim, and it was really unexpected that we got a potent model. Basically, the differences between these two being the fascia, we kept the round headlights throughout the whole car's lifespan, and the JDM ones got facelifted with the elongated headlights, which weren't as popular in Japan. At this very moment in time, the Integra Type R had erased the negative stigma that was associated with front-wheel drive. It will be a few generations for others to catch up. Not even the R32 Golf stood a chance with four-wheel drive, and that's with the DC2 and DC5 competing against it. Now, the Civic, I've sort of left the Civic out here. It would also share this treatment in the form of the EK9 Civic Type R, which was based on the 6th generation Civic hatchback. Being slightly lighter than Integra, it offered a more playful experience since it was pretty much lighter. And to seal the deal, although not as crazy as Type R, for the 1990 model year, we got the iconic EM1 Civic Si, or SIR if you live in Canada. Finally, a Civic finally came equipped with a proper VTEC engine, the B16A from the Del Sol, which this engine was used previously. And when this car came out, it would actually now cement Honda's place in front-wheel drive sport comebacks. They were pretty much the golden standard on the racetrack and in culture too. Honda would pretty much continue to update and improve its platforms, and even to this day, it can make you question, do you really need four-wheel drive in a hot hatch? And I'm looking at the GR Corolla and the STI. But that is pretty much how Honda proved that front wheel drive doesn't have to suck.